But today is games you should know by heart. So I'm going to walk you guys through probably, I would say, 8 to 10 miniatures that maybe you can memorize. Most games I'll show are under 20 moves. And these are mostly games that I have memorized, that I've shown to students over the years. And I think they're not only like fun to look at, but also very instructive. And a lot of them come with like opening ideas that that can be very venomous. I don't have coffee on my face, do I?
No.
No? Okay. I've been drinking this a lot.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, I would like to start out with kind of a fun one. It's possible you've seen some of these before. I've called this How to Beat Mike Kummer, as if we know Mike Kummer's favorite opening. Anyone? And Simon? Fried liver, yeah. So I'm going to show a response to the fried liver for black. And don't tell Mike Kummer about this, because if you ever play him, he might walk into it. So the game goes e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. And we'll go into a standard fried liver. And I have to say, I've had this exact same game at least 3 times in online Blitz, and a few more times just over the board play in casual games. And I know if you play against Mike Kummer, he'll get very, very excited after knight g5, threatening f7, and I know he's won a lot of games as white. So the main move for black is d5, simply defending against knight or bishop take f7. Mike will almost always take on d5. And now black has a few different moves here, but the most venomous move and the move that I would play, especially if I'm looking to win quickly, is knight d4. And I'm not actually sure if Mike has seen this line before, but if he hasn't, it's very, very tempting for white to play d6. And a lot of players will play d6 without thinking too much, with the idea of discovered attack against f-pawn, threatening either bishop take f7 or knight take f7. And now the nice thing about this position for black is you don't have to defend against the f7 threat. You can simply create counterplay of your own. So best move is queen take d6. And okay, if Mike Kummer were playing white, he would probably take with the knights. He would see the queen's attacked, rook's attacked. He'll win the rook on h8. Black will play queen c6. Attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn. Let's say white ignores both of those threats, takes a rook. Let me ask you guys, would you take the bishop on c4 or the pawn on g2? Assuming you haven't seen the notation. You mean G2 or C4?
Oh yeah, G2.
G2, yeah. Yeah, amazingly, queen takes G2 is much stronger than queen takes C4. Usually you want to take the more valuable piece, but in this position, taking on G2 and opening the king side is going to lead to much better things for black. So now black's attacking the rook. Rook has to move to F1 to save itself. And now there's a pretty nice finish. I'll show you guys the first move, queen e4. Let's say bishop e2. Black to move, beat Mike Kummer. Ben Simon sees it. What is it? Knight f3 mate. Pretty nice way, smother mating the white king. A lot of people will just walk into this unknowingly as white. If we look at white's moves, they were pretty much all natural. Starting with pawn take on d5, d6 was the most logical move, threatening the pawn. And if white gets greedy, wins material, he gets severely punished. So you can trap a lot of beginners in this line, but amazingly, this line has also been played against one of the top players of all time. So if we go back to this position, I don't know if too many people know about this game, but there was a game Bobby Fischer lost in under 15 moves, and he also had this position as white. And black played the same line, d5, pawn take d5, knight d4. And I should mention that Fischer was playing in a simul. So usually during a simul, you might not be thinking that straight. And in this game, I think he got a little too confident and then fell apart very quickly. So the move he played here is actually the best move. Fischer played c3 in this position. Much stronger than d6, simply attacking the knight and kind of putting the question, where does the knight move? Now Fischer's opponent, whose name was actually Robert Burger, which maybe sounds slightly appetizing. Robert did not move the knight on d4, but he counterattacked. He played b5, which is a very standard move for this position, creating a lot of chaos. Knight's attacked, but the bishop is also attacked. So if pawn take knight, pawn take bishop, it would get a little bit crazy. So Fischer in this position played the best move, and maybe not the most obvious move. He played bishop to f1. And I should probably explain this move. It's a little bit complicated, but he retreats all the way back to f1 because he wants to keep an eye on attacking the b5 pawn. And he doesn't play bishop e2 because of knight take e2. And he doesn't play bishop d3 because black has this annoying move bishop f5. And the bishop wouldn't be defended on d3. And I think this would be very reasonable for black. So after bishop f1, black is now in somewhat of a pickle because his knight is still attacked on d4, and the knight is also defending the pawn on b5, which is attacked by the bishop. So the move Burger plays in this position is knight take d5, winning the pawn on d5 and attacking the knight. Oop. So black wants to play queen take g5 next. Fischer continues, pawn take knight, queen take knight, bishop take b5 with check. And now the interesting thing about this game is black completely ignored the fact that his king's in the center and attacks, and he simply moved king d8. And his main focus was to forget about his king in the center, but to focus on attacking white's king. And as we'll see, that's pretty much how the game ended. So Fischer castled. Black played bishop to b7. Then Fischer played queen f3, which maybe looks a little bit suspicious at first because the queen is on the same diagonal as the bishop. But any knight move, any discovered attack against the queen would walk into queen take b7. So the knight is actually pinned to the bishop. And now it's a little bit crazy because both players are aiming to attack each other's king. This position, black played pawn take on d4. And then Fischer made the losing move. It's interesting because the losing move here for white looks like a winning move. Anyone want to try and guess what white played? How can white win a pawn and threaten mate in one? Yeah, that's exactly what Fischer played. And usually when you play the same move as Fischer, it's usually a good thing, but in this case it's a pretty bad thing. Because after queen take f7, black responded by not only defending against the queen d7 threat, but he made a threat of his own. The crushing move for black was played knight f6. And after knight f6, Fischer resigned. There's just too many threats. The most obvious threat, queen take g2. The second most obvious threat, queen take bishop. And probably the easiest to overlook threat, let's say white defends and plays g3. Black would play pretty much the soul-crushing bishop d5, just trapping the queen. and the queen has nowhere to go. So that's how you beat Fischer in, what was it, 12 moves. Doesn't happen too often. I think this is the shortest ever recorded game that Fischer lost. So yeah, definitely a game you should know by heart. Any game where you beat Fischer in 12 moves, you should have memorized. So how about we move on? We moved from beating Mike Kummer to beating Fischer. So let's continue trying to walk up the chain. Next game I want to show you guys is how to beat Karjakin in under 15 moves. And the interesting thing about this game, after I saw this game, I started playing the English opening. I started playing c4 on move 1 because I saw if Karjakin can lose in actually 12 moves against this opening, then might be an opening to consider playing. Karjakin was definitely the losing player in this game. So this was a rapid game. c4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, knight f3. And the most common move for black here is to play knight f6, which is called the 4 knights English. Karjakin chose a slight side variation. He played pawn g6, which has somewhat of a solid reputation. The idea for black is to play just bishop g7, d6, usually knight e7, castle, eventually f5. And if white doesn't interfere with the setup, it's very reasonable for black. But in this position, white challenged black immediately by playing d4. And definitely the most ambitious move. Karjakin took. And now, most logical move is to take back on d4, but that's not what white played. White played knight to d5. And this is the type of move you might see more often in a blitz or rapid game, which it's sacrificing material, but aiming to attack the opponent as quickly as possible. So black continued, bishop g7. And now white starts with some initiative, bishop to g5. And the pieces are coordinating very well. The knight supports the bishop. The bishop attacks the queen. Knight on d5 controls both squares that could help block the queen, or block the bishop from attacking the queen. And of course, the d4 pawn is also under fire. So white has sacked a pawn, but accelerated the development of the pieces. So black played knight g e7, which is not the best move. Black should have played probably f6, which is a slightly ugly looking move, blocking the bishop, but it's probably necessary. After knight g e7, white plays a pretty brilliant move here. I might as well just show you guys, knight take d4, with the main idea of disturbing this knight from defending e7. So if knight take d4, then white would simply win the queen. Bishop take e7, queen is trapped. If bishop take d4, which was played in the game, it's actually even worse for black, because white has amazing queen take d4. And let me ask you guys, can black take the queen? What would happen in this position if black takes the queen on d4? White to move. You can pause your video at home.
Knight f6 check.
Knight f6, king f8, bishop h6. This is a classic mating pattern with just knight and bishop. Pretty epic way to finish off a game. So Karjakin saw that, and he, you see he's in big trouble here because knight f6 is a huge threat, and he decides to castle. And amazingly enough, it's white to move mate in 5. And I'm not expecting that any of you will find it too quickly, so I'll give you the first few moves. White will play knight f6 check, king h8, and now maybe the hardest move to find. White's queen is still under attack, so any knight move would allow queen take or knight take d4. However, there is a move here to sacrifice the queen but get mates, and that move is knight g4. And at this point, Karjakin had enough. He saw that mate was coming and he resigned. If the game were to continue, black would have to pretty much take the queen. And now it's going to be the same type of mating pattern with the bishop and the knight just dominating the king. So this was a pretty sweet game. Actually 10 moves after knight g4, black resigning. So it's not every day a super GM loses in 10 moves. And just for the record, I should verify this was Andreikin, and this was 2010. So I think Karjakin has learned his lesson since then. Let me show you guys a game that I played. This is a game, it was just like a casual blitz game that I played back in 2013 or 2014. And it was after a tournament finished, I was waiting in the hotel lobby for my cab, and I was playing my friend Akshay. And we played a blitz game which has stuck with me to this day. And right after we played the game, I remembered all the moves and then started showing it to all my students. And it's a pretty memorable game for reasons which you'll see. So there's another English opening, and we just saw white crush with the English. Now we're going to see black crushing the English. I played e5. Akshay played knight c3, and I played d6, which it's funny. It's actually kind of similar to the setup that Karjakin was trying to use. My plan is to play g6, bishop g7, knight e7, and just have a solid position. And my opponent disturbed it, or tried to disturb it as much as possible. He played pawn to d4, attacking the e-pawn and trying to slow down my development. So I took, he took, whoop, mouse slip. I played knight c6. And then he played kind of a weird looking move, but it's actually a very fine move. He played queen d2. Looks like it blocks him the bishop, but this bishop on c1 actually wants to go to b2. So d2 is actually a very fine square for the queen. And after b3, bishop b2, white is just continuing to have some harmonious development. So at this point, most of my moves kind of were played with some kind of overall purpose in mind. First move is bishop to e6, attacking c4, provoking my opponent to play b3. And then I play knight to e7. So what my goal is in this position is simply to play pawn d5. So I've already have 3 pieces developed. And it's not so common that black is ahead in development over white so early in the game. But because I have a bit more development, I want to open up the position. Because usually if you're ahead in development, any opening of the position will favor you. So now white made a pretty slow and just probably bad move. He played g3, aiming to play bishop g2, but it's too slow because I hit him immediately with d5. So what white should have done was probably play e4, just control more space and stop d5. But after g3, then black seizes initiative. I play d5. He takes, I take. And now if we look, there's some problems for whites. The bishop on f8 is coming to b4, and I have threats. If white isn't careful and plays bishop g2, I have ideas of, oh, I was about to say take, and bishop b4, but that probably doesn't work because bishop takes c6. So I probably would play, after bishop g2, maybe just bishop b4 and increase pressure along this diagonal. My opponent played a very suspicious looking move. He played pawn a3. If we notice, white has done very poorly in developing his pieces and given me a lot of initiative. And this was a blitz game. And normally I would play pretty fast, especially early on in a blitz game. But in this position, I stopped and probably thought for at least a minute, because there's a line here which I began calculating, and the calculation kind of flows. And it turns out that in this position, before I played my next move, I actually saw what was going to end the game. I saw the final position before I played my next move. So I'm not going to have you guys try and calculate the whole variation, but there is a variation here where if white's not careful, it could just be game over. So let me show you guys first few moves, then I'll have you guys try and find the final move. So I play knight takes c3, he takes, I play queen d5. So double attack, forking the rook and the pawn. White obviously wants to save the rook, so he plays knight f3. I saw I could win the pawn. Take, take, take. So I was about to play this really quickly ahead of time, but when I was calculating this, I saw that I'm not actually winning a pawn that easily because white can play rook b1, skewering the bishop to the b7 pawn. And it looks like white can win the pawn back. But amazingly enough, black has a pretty hidden resource here to trick white. So having already calculated the move ahead of time, I played my next move very quickly. I played bishop a4. He took on b7, assuming he would just win back the pawn, no problem. And now black to move and finish off the game. I played one more move, and then white resigned. Pawn? Oh, rook d8. Rook d8, yeah, a bit more aggressive. White wouldn't resign after this move. I know it's threatening mates, but white can play like bishop d2, defend. But you have an idea. You have an idea of threatening mate on d1. Now you want to look for a different move which might use the same mating idea, but slightly different execution. Okay, what are the opening principles? Attack the center, develop your pieces.
Castle really?
Castle, yes.
Oh, okay, too much. Oh, God.
That's okay.
I thought you were playing a game. No.
Yeah, castle queenside accomplishes these two goals. Remember, it's legal to move your rook through attack, but not the king through attack. So castling is perfectly legal here, and there's no way white can defend against mate and save the rook. So pretty nice way to win a blitz game. Unfortunately for my opponent, nothing he could do but give up in this position. So if we go back, just to kind of walk you through the thought process of calculating forward, I basically just look for the most natural moves. And usually when I think in a blitz game, I'll just kind of play a game out in my head and then look for kind of most expected moves for each side. So I calculated the most forcing move. I had seen the fork. I'd seen he would probably defend. I saw I won the pawn. I saw we would trade. Then I saw rook b1. And this is where I spent most of my time thinking, how do I deal with rook b1? And then I saw this bishop a4 and castle queenside idea. And I should also mention there's many chess books with this type of puzzle. I've seen many puzzles like this where the solution is castling queenside. There's actually a lot of puzzles where, if we just cheat for a moment, where the bishop is not here, but the king's on d1, and you would castle queenside with check and win the rook. So sometimes exposure to these creative ideas can actually allow you to find them in your own games. So any questions? OK, let's do a game. This is actually a game of a former WGM in residence, Katerina Nemcova. And the way I found this game is by looking up her games and then finding the shortest decisive game she'd ever played. And this was a game she beat, I forget the exact rating, but it was someone over 2,000. And she was black, and she played against a Smith-Morra. And it's very rare that you'll see black win early in the Smith-Morra, because it's usually white sacrificing a pawn for counterplay. But we're going to see a nice opening trick by Katerina. So I'm going to just zoom through the moves. And for anyone who plays the Sicilian as black, I would highly recommend looking maybe a bit deeper at this variation, because I think it's not only a nice trick to play, but it's also a very sound variation against the Smith-Morra. So White will play d4, sack the pawn, and then black will continue e6, knight c6, bishop c4. And okay, there's a lot of different moves here. I know Ben Feingold wrote a whole book about the Feingold system against the Smith-Morra. I honestly have no clue what that is, but I think it involves putting the queen on b7 or something. Anyway, the move that Katerina played here is starting with queen c7, white castles, and then she plays knight f6. And most Smith-Morra players will kind of play in the same fashion. The idea about the Smith-Morra is sacrificing the pawn mainly to open up the d file and to use some kind of initiative against black's d pawn. And usually white will play queen e2, preparing rook d1. And here's where black kind of sets up the trap. And black plays a very kind of weird looking move, but it actually makes a lot of sense the more you look at it. Knight to g4. Kind of breaking some principles, moving the same piece twice. But there's a very sneaky threat where if white isn't careful, white can lose the game right away. So I've actually had this exact same position myself, and I've had a couple games where white plays a losing move and I'll win instantly. So the losing move here, which I've encountered and Katerina actually encountered in a tournament, is playing h3. Terrible move. I've actually looked this up in the database. There's 45 games where white has played this move. Loses every single game. Black to move, win the game. Knight d4, very nice. Really, same thing. Yeah.
It was like my third US.
Ouch. Usually what happens if you walk into this trap as white, you learn it and never happens again. Knight d4 is pretty painful because queen's attacked, ideas on h2. If the queen moves, let's say d1, you just remove the knight and then mate on h2. The best white can do, I think, is take the knight and then just lose the queen. But most people either resign or get mated before this. Yep. So yeah, it's a pretty nasty variation, this knight g4 move. And interesting thing about this is white's best move here isn't that obvious. White pretty much has to play g3 as far as I know, simply blocking the diagonal. And then black would continue with h5 and have some interesting dynamic play. And also important to note, black's up a pawn. So black's attacking and up a pawn. Another variation, white could try rook d1, preventing knight d4, but that would allow bishop to c5. And then it's very annoying for white to deal with the pawn on f2, and black is just simply better here. Initiative, extra pawn. White would probably have to play bishop to e3, trade off some pieces. If rook f1, then knight d4 again wins. So yeah, Sicilian players, I mean, learning this line for black against the Smith-Morra is very much worth it. Let me show you two games which have like a similar theme, but are different openings. We're going to start with a French defense. I don't know if I have the game here, but hopefully I know it by heart. This is an opening I teach to a lot of students because it's very venomous. And if black plays naturally, black will lose very quickly. So white will play e4. And if you're an e4 player and you don't know what to play against the French, I would highly recommend checking out this opening. It's called the two knights attack. It starts with knight f3. Black will play d5. And then white will play knight c3. So just named after the fact that white's developing two knights as quickly as possible. So the main line goes knight f6. White will play e5. Knight d7. d4. And one of the points behind the two knights attack is white will aim to control the center more with the minor pieces rather than the pawns. And white is completely okay giving up the d4 pawn. So after the main move, c5, white will just simply take. And white is more concerned about just completing development, playing bishop f4 and bishop d3, and not concerned about keeping the d4 pawn. So black will usually take back. White will play bishop d3. Let's say knight c6. Now bishop f4. Now we've reached a classic position in the two knights attack. And if you play this opening for white, you should definitely know this position and know kind of the main black moves that black can play here. There are, I would say, 3 common moves that black plays. 2 of them get into trouble very quickly, and then 1 of them is just the main line. Main line is f6, pawn take f6, knight take f6. And it's a playable position. White has given up both center pawns, but has some nice play with queen e2, castle queenside, maybe knight e5. And there's many GM games which have gone down this route. But the miniature that I would like to show you is when black plays the natural but terrible move, castling kingside, walking into a very classic trick from white. And especially if you're a French defense player as black, you should know about this trick and know kind of when not to walk into it. White to move and pretty much win the game. Ben Simon, have you seen this before?
I think so. Yeah.
What do you think the move is?
Bishop takes h7.
Bishop take h7. We call this the Greek gift.
Yeah.
And it's very important, like especially when you play chess, to kind of develop some pattern recognition. So when you see your bishop on d3, knight on f3, queen on d1, and black is castled kingside with this structure, you should instantly think Greek gift and then calculate to see if it works. In this case, I mean, it's pretty much just unstoppable. After bishop take h7, king take h7, knight g5. I've seen many, many games go down this path. Best move for black is actually to play king g6 here and try and weather the storm. But the game I'll show is king g8, which just gets smashed by queen h5. And now black's in a situation where mate is coming on h7, and there's very, very few ways to defend against mate. The best move for black is probably queen take g5, which just loses a queen. A lot of players will try to play rook e8. And now it's white to move and mate in 1, 2, 3, 4, if I'm counting correctly. First move is queen take f7, king h8. Oh, I think it was 5 moves. I wasn't counting correctly. Queen h5, king g8, queen h7, king f8, queen h8, king e7, queen take g7 mate. This is all forced since black played rook e8. So this is called the Greek gift. The Greek gift is bishop take h7, but the opening is the two knights attack against the French defense. Yeah. Yeah, very venomous opening, because black always has to be careful about castling, and usually if you can get bishop take h7, it falls apart very quickly for black. So yeah, if you're going to memorize one line against the French defense, definitely memorize this line. Okay, let me show you another game, related theme, but different opening. Next game I'm going to show you deals with this move, b3. Has anyone encountered this move on the black side? I mean, yeah, the main point of this move is to like throw off the opponent and get into some position without too much opening theory. Now, the nice thing if you're playing black is to actually know some theory and know what to do. And all you have to know is really one line to play against b3, and it's actually one of my favorite openings as black. If my opponent plays b3, I'll automatically play this line. So it goes e5, bishop e2, attacking the pawn, knight c6, defending, e3, knight f6. And most players, when they play b3 on move 1, they'll go into this line. The two bishops coordinate pretty well. The first bishop attacks the knight, second bishop pressures the pawn. So white is planning to win a pawn here. White wants to take on c6 and then take on e5. And if you don't know what to do as black in this position, it's actually sort of annoying because it's not that obvious how to defend the pawn on e5, and you might have to do something like d6 or bishop d6. But the best move is actually a really nice move for black. It's to play e5. Simply moving the pawn up a square and leaving white without a target. So now the bishop is just kind of staring at the knight, which is very well supported. The pawn is very safe on d5. It can be protected at some point with d5. And in the process, black is just gaining space. I should also mention here that after e4, black wants to play a6 and just get rid of this bishop on b5. So I've had countless games where my opponent will play knight e2. I'll play a6. And now white is forced to trade off the bishop for the knight. The bishop cannot retreat, I believe, to either square because d5 just traps the bishop. So white would have to take, and let's say castle, bishop d6. And I think I've had 2 online 1-minute games where I've reached this exact position, and both games ended the exact same way. And now you guys should kind of recognize the pattern from what we just saw. You should recognize the bishop, the knight, the queen, and this structure on the king side. So what would the move be for black? Bishop take h2. Pretty much same exact thing. Greek gift. This case, I mean, not too much different. White will take. Black plays knight g4. So last time we saw the king retreating to g1, and after queen h4, it's looking pretty bad. The game I want to show you now is with king to g3. Because after king g3, black still has to play somewhat accurately to win the game. And black actually has a bunch of very good-looking moves here. Black could play queen g5. Black could play queen d6 check. Black could play h5. I think all of these moves give black some advantage. But the move that I like to play is h5, just wanting to bring the pawn to h4. And if we look, the king doesn't really have too many squares. The king cannot move backwards. And the king does not want to move on the same diagonal as the bishop. So white is pretty stuck in this position. And both the games I played that reached this point, white took on e4. And now, if I'm not mistaken, after h4, king f3, black to move and force mate. I'm just looking for the first move. So what's the strongest check that black can deliver in this position? Very good. We call it a rook, not a castle. But yeah, knight h2. Yeah, forking the king and the rook, but more importantly, dragging the king up the board. Because the king cannot move to g3, it has to move to f4. And we're actually not concerned about winning the rook. We're concerned about checkmating the king. And in this position, the checkmate is pretty beautiful. Black can play g5, king e5, and just f6 mate. So I've had this exact same position twice. And it's a nice position because black pretty much is not developed. The only developed piece is a knight on h2. And the pawns are doing a good chunk of the work. So this is a pretty nice game to know by heart, especially if you know that someone's going to play the Larson opening. A lot of times they will reach at least this position, and if you know to play e4, I think it guarantees black a very comfortable game. It also leads to the possibility of them walking into the Greek gift. So, any questions so far? Anyone heard of Alex Yermolinsky? Yes, pretty famous player, given a bunch of lectures online. Also wrote a book called The Road to Chess Improvement. I think now he's more of a coach than a player. Anyone heard of Emory Tate? Yes, okay, Ben Simon knows everyone. Emory Tate is maybe one of the most famous international masters that lived in the US. He passed away a few years ago, but he was known as one of the more aggressive players out there. And I actually played Tate 4 times in tournament games when I was younger, and I've lost every single time. I think he's the only person that I have a 0-4 record against. And unfortunately, I can't improve it now that he's gone. But anyway, this is one of Tate's probably most embarrassing games because he lost in under 15 moves. And he tried to use his kind of unique, creative, and aggressive style, but it pretty severely backfired. So Yermolinsky is white. Yermolinsky is known for kind of just classical, solid Soviet-style chess. And we see this on the very first move with d4, and then Tate plays c5. Tate trying to throw him off and get some kind of weird, unique position. Usually when black plays c5, the best move is d5, which is what Yermolinsky played. One of the ideas is if white takes the pawn, then black would simply play e6 and then win back the pawn easily with 2 center pawns against 1 center pawn. So d5, especially if you're a d4 player, d5 is certainly the move to play in this position. But Tate continues, e6. Yermolinsky defends the pawn with the knight c3, take. And the game actually revolves now around the d5 square. White has just complete control over the square with the knight on d5 supported by the queen. And Tate tries to remove the knight. So he starts with knight e7. And now let me ask you guys an interesting question. How can you use this bishop to help control the d5 square? As usually a dark squared bishop cannot help control a light square, but in a case like this, there is a move which works. Bishop g5, very good. So you're not directly attacking the square, but you are pinning the knight, which was trying to challenge the square. So white has some nice pressure against the knight, has control over d5. Tate plays h6, trying to kick away the bishop. Bishop h4. And now Tate did not play the worst move in the position, which is g5, because that would get smothered mated instantly with knight f6. Instead, Tate tries a different idea, which is almost just as bad. He plays queen a5, which looks okay, unpinning the knight, c3. And then he plays knight f5. And looks okay for black. He's solved the problem of the pin. Queen's active, knight's active, attacking the bishop. However, he missed white's next move. And after white's next move, the game pretty much ends instantly. So white to move and win. Knight f6 check. Looks risky. Pawn take. And knight c7. Knight c7 you would love to play if the queen weren't on a5. It would be made if the queen weren't on a5, but just queen take, right? So it's interesting because knight c7, you might see this move first, then you see the queen's attacking. And then that should kind of lead you to look for ways to remove this queen from a5. It's very common you'll see an idea before you see the actual execution of the idea. So how can you remove the queen from a5 to make knight c7 possible? Caleb, do you see it? You do? What is it? Queen a4. It's completely okay to give away a queen if you're going to mate. And in this case, if the queen is taken, I think Emory Tate actually took the queen. So he saw he was losing anyway and then just got mated. Yeah, pretty unfortunate way to lose a game. And there's no other good continuation for black. The queen has to stay defending the square, but it can't move to any of these squares. they're all controlled by the white pieces. So yeah, that's how you beat an IM in, what, 9 moves? So I hope you guys are inspired. Hopefully you've learned maybe some new openings, some new tricks that you can use. And thanks for coming out. Time for Thai food.